with us tonight. My name's Bart, Huby. I lead our sport analytics advisory practice here at LCP, and on behalf of the firm I'd like to thank you for joining us for this discussion this evening on the Independent Football Regulator. Challenge or opportunity, that's the question. So before we get into the substance of the evening, I'll cover a few practical points first. Fire exits are located just outside this door and back through the way we came. We're not expecting a fire alarm test today, so if the alarm sounds, please treat it as real and follow staff instructions. Toilets are back out the way we came in by the lift, just either side of that, and we'll be having a short comfort break after the second panel session. Short 5-minute break between the first the other ones. I'd also flag that the session is being video recorded and photographed, which may be used for social media and marketing purposes. Please also note that there are members of the press in the room, and Chatham House rules do not apply to this session. If you've already done so, if you've not already done so, please you scan the QR code on the screen. Unfortunately, that screen over there isn't working, but our QR code in front. This will take you to a Slido app where you can take part in a couple of quick polls we're going to carry out, submit questions and upvote the ones that you're most interested in having answered. We'll be taking questions at the end of each panel session, and we'll do our best to get through as many as we can. If you can complete the profile section on Slido with your name and organisation, the panel chair will then be able to identify the questioner. I think we may also be doing handheld mic questions from the audience. After we wrap up this evening, we very much hope you can stay for something to eat and drink and continue the conversation. So turning now to the topic of this evening, football is at a pivotal moment. Over recent years, we've seen extraordinary growth, innovation and global reach across the game. But at the same time, we've also seen financial fragility, governance failures and the very real human and community impact when clubs get into trouble. And against that backdrop, regulation has moved from what was a theoretical debate to something much more immediate and practical. At LCP, we sit at the intersection of data, economics, governance and long-term risk. Much of our work, both within sport and beyond it, is about helping organisations navigate complex regulatory environments and understand how rules, incentives and behaviour impact and interact in practice. That perspective is very much what we shaped today's event. LCP has been working in football for several years now, originally in analytics, particularly through our Transfer Lab player data scouting and recruitment platform, and more recently our work has expanded significantly into advisory, governance and financial sustainability of football clubs. In particular, we've been developing our LCP Assist service designed to support clubs in complying with the licensing requirements of the forthcoming regulatory framework. That work has reinforced for us just how complex the practical implications of regulation will be and how differently they are likely to affect clubs depending on size, ownership model and the financial position. The introduction of the regulator represents one of the most significant structural changes in English football in decades. For some it's seen as a constraint, for others as a necessary foundation for long-term stability. But whatever one's views, the fact is that all 116 regulated clubs will need to submit their initial licensing applications before the end of this year. This evening is not about advocacy for or against regulation. It's about informed discussion grounded in evidence and experience and focused on what this means in practice. We're fortunate and indeed delighted to have an excellent set of panellists with us tonight covering governance, finance, regulation and the football industry itself. The audience in the room brings an equally wide range of perspectives, and we very much hope this will be an active and challenging discussion. In a moment, I'll hand over to my colleague Aaryanam Banerji, LCP's Head of Football Governance, and Aaryanam will set the scene for the evening and outline the key themes that will run through our panel sessions. But before that, I'd just like to carry out a quick audience poll, which I will be repeating at the end of the evening, to see whether and to what extent the discussion has affected views and opinions. The question is a very simple one. Do you believe the introduction of the Independent Football Regulator is either A, very much a good idea, B, very much a bad idea, C, some good, some bad, or D, unsure at this point in time? Okay. So at the moment we have 55% a good idea, going up to 60% now. Only 6% think it's a bad idea, moving up to 7%, some good, some bad, 29%, unsure, only 9%. So everyone's got a pretty good opinion at the moment, so we'll see if much of that changes. Okay, so we've had 61 votes in now, 62, so that's pretty good. We will see what it's like at the end of the session. Okay, well thank you for being here, and I look forward to a lively and thoughtful discussion. Over to you, Aaryanam.
Well, good evening everyone, and welcome first of all to LCP. Thank you all for braving the mid-January weather and indeed the central London crowds to be here today. I am delighted to see so many people in the room, and I am personally deeply excited by today's event. My name is Aaryanam. I'm head of football governance here at LCP. I work across a range of areas in relation to the regulatory and governance side of the football industry, not least today's topic, the Independent Football Regulator, the IFR. I want to begin by outlining why, at this particular moment, LCP wanted to gather some of football's finest minds to talk specifically about the IFR. Because I think football presently is at a significant moment. The idea of independent regulation within football is of course not a new one. Since the mid-90s, football has flirted with the idea of some sort of independent oversight. But it was not until the Crouch Report in 2021 that the industry finally made its move. 4.5 years on from that report's publication, and we have liftoff, men's football finds itself at the start of a new era of governance, with an operational independent regulator backed by statute. Now, a change of this significance has naturally provoked discussion, debate, and criticism. It has inspired critical questions in relation to effectiveness and operation, and it has left the industry anticipating what the direct impact of this new body might be. And at its core, that is what LCP hopes to unpick today, to first of all cut through the noise around the IFR and to harness the expertise that we have in the room to answer and advise on some of those outstanding questions, whilst trying to map out precisely what this might mean for stakeholders across the industry, both in the short and the long term. To do this, we have put together 3 panel sessions, each with a slightly different topic at its core. And it is my contention that a common theme in relation to the IFR more widely will be its ability to successfully navigate a number of quite finely poised balancing acts, whether this be attempting to find middle ground between acting as an advocacy first body and having teeth, or balancing the demands of competition organisers. In that spirit, our first panel asks, what problems was the IFR brought in to solve? And in doing so, what challenges might it face? The touch paper in the form of the Crouch Report was of course lit by the attempted creation of the European Super League and a still present threat of remodelling football's competitive structure. But the public manifestation of that sort of deeply unpopular cultural reset and structural reset upon which the move for the Super League was built sets upon a number of other structural problems within football. At its core, the European Super League demonstrated a complete misalignment in interest and attitude between fans and the leadership groups of the clubs that they support. And perhaps that reflects that the football industry is now contending with an increasingly divergent set of ownership models and strategies. And whilst the continuing flurry of investment into English football is welcome, regulation may be required to ensure that this does not come at a cultural cost. And that idea of protection and protecting key stakeholders such as clubs and fans is perhaps most acute in relation to the football pyramid's financial position. LCP's latest report on the financial sustainability of the men's football industry has highlighted that 84% of regulated clubs are loss-making. The average championship clubs now loses £15 million a year. That's 38% of their revenues. League One clubs lose on average £5 million a year. That's 68% of their revenues. League Two clubs over £2 million a year, and National League clubs around £1 million a year. Furthermore, 13 clubs disclosed a material uncertainty on whether they could continue operating for another 12 months, and another 73 disclosed that they are reliant on owner funding to continue as a going concern. It has therefore, since the Crouch Report, been a central purpose of the IFR that these issues are addressed. In that regard, LCP's report has highlighted two key points for the IFR's consideration: a requirement for the gradual introduction of significantly higher levels of security for potential future losses at clubs, either through liquid assets or legally binding guarantees. And also, should the IFR's mediation powers be activated, the inclusion of ring-fenced funding as part of any redistribution to be considered. There is, of course, and there should be, a limit to everything. It is unfair to unquestioningly support failing organisations, whether they be football clubs or supermarkets. And yet the place of football clubs as items of heritage within local communities, as community assets, does surely, I would argue, afford them that extra layer of regulatory protection from financial failure. In attempting to find resolution to these problems, the IFR is challenged by entering a market which is internally conflicted, with stakeholders of increasingly divergent outlook. It is also entering a regulatory space that is already crowded by competition organisers, by the FA. The IFR Football's new hire will have to find balance across several areas, between competition organisers in relation to financial flow, but also in implementing its own effective regulatory regime without duplicating or impeding upon those that already exist, and being able to steer a more financially sustainable culture amongst clubs, whilst allowing them to maintain independence. I'm looking forward to learning more about these topics from our panellists. Our second panel will ask what the key considerations for the IFR should be. The creation of a new body such as this brings with it challenges of all varieties: legal, financial, cultural, and everything in between. This, we must remember, is no small feat being undertaken. The IFR is tasked with the creation of a new club licensing regime to be implemented proportionally across 5 tiers. It is tasked equally with the creation of a new owners, directors and senior executives regime, and how far and wide this will stretch is a more crucial question now than ever. There is, as mentioned, the IFR's potential role as financial mediator between competition organisers, and the key points that it will have to note in finding a long-lasting resolution. And there is, of course, the question about what the IFR's creation will do to existing regulatory bodies. Where now is the job of the FA? And how can we avoid a duplication of regulation with those regimes that already exist? And all of these considerations must be made in the context of English football's many continuing successes. Because for all the talk of financial difficulty, LCP's analysis also showed that total revenues across the pyramid continue to grow. The Premier League is now broadcast in 190 countries worldwide, and government research shows that English football is consistently among the top 3 points of admiration in this country by foreign governments. The other two, for those of you who are wondering, are the Royal Family and the BBC. English football remains, therefore, one of our great, indisputable national successes, a product admired at home and one of our strongest cultural exports abroad. How does the IFR find a balance in fixing some of the challenges that face us, whilst not harming that enormous success? I'm glad that we have the expertise in the room to unpick this. And that leads to our third panel, because whatever decisions the IFR makes, and whatever challenges it sets out to solve, it will change the landscape for football, for stakeholders across the industry. Whether those are clubs now under the guise of regulation, competition organisers affected by changing financial flow, or fans looking for greater protection, the actions and the reactions of the IFR will have a material impact. With such a range of stakeholders either directly or indirectly coming under its aegis, it has a challenging line to toe. LCP's recent report, Football Governance and Transition, published in collaboration with the Lord Adventure Group, found systemic governance challenges at club level and beyond, including a dearth in the number of directors at many clubs and a lack of diversity in both gender and age. Whilst this is the case, there remains a necessity for the IFR to move proportionally and appreciate the nature of many clubs across the pyramid as small to medium-sized businesses, whilst remaining effective in its task of promoting stronger governance. In that spirit, it must operate as it is promised, with an advocacy-first approach, but with enough teeth to give it industry presence. The IFR too must make sure that fans are respected, given a voice, as the Crouch report said, but find a way of ensuring that in the increasingly diverse and widespread world of football fandom, that voice belongs to all fans. It must ensure that competition organisers are able to work in harmony, whilst not detracting from their independent successes and remaining firm in its stance against breakaway competitions. And around the IFR, the regulation of the future must be decided. Calls have been made for the inclusion of all sorts of parties to come under the aegis of the IFR, whether that be players or the women's game as a whole. the government must decide with prudence, and I would argue extreme caution, whether it would be appropriate to expand its remit in the coming years. What all of these topics in question show is that dissecting the detail of the changing moment of football governance and the IFR is crucial. Understanding the changes at play and advising on best practice for a range of stakeholders is now critical. LCP's own service offering, LCP Assist, seeks to do just that, with a focus on clubs under regulation. More widely, the IFR has inspired, and will continue to inspire, intense scrutiny and debate, but it is mine and LCP's strong contention that wherever one stands on the idea of independent regulation within football, it is in the best interest of stakeholders across the game that the IFR is given the best possible chance of success through the sort of knowledge sharing and expertise that we will listen to today. And in that spirit, I want to put on record an enormous thanks to each of our speakers. Their expertise and their knowledge in this room and of course beyond will, we hope, inform and shape this new era in the football industry. And so without further ado, it gives me enormous pleasure to once again welcome you all to LCP and welcome our first panel, consisting of Bill Bush, Chris Anderson and Tom Drutrix, and chaired by LCP's very own Sir Steve Webb. Steve.
Huby, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone.